Okay, so this is part 5 of my MIP SP-2 restoration project. As you can see, I'm filming outside. There's still a little bit of light out, and I figured I'd try to use the outdoor lighting to get a better view of everything here. So from the last video, I had completed basically the rolling chassis without the wheels and tires. But now, the wheels and tires are mounted, obviously, and the electronics are mounted, and everything's all done. The body and wing are painted. So this is now complete. So I just wanted to go over a little bit about the wheels and the electronics and everything. So for the rear wheels, it was very straightforward. I just used the re-released RC10 Worlds car rear wheels, which have a deep offset in the wheel. Okay. And that's just how you would normally, do an RC10 rear with the standard rear arms and everything. So there's nothing really special there. But for the front, as I had mentioned in the previous video, I have to use B4 wheel axles to get through the steering block. And that creates a bit of an outwards offset that pushes the wheel out. So I had to use some kind of four-wheel drive buggy front wheel with basically a flush front end, or not a flush front end, a flush surface here on the outside of the wheel. So that way it would push the tire or the whole wheel back inwards. So these particular wheels are from the Kyosho Laser ZX5, and because they're metric, I did have to bore out the hole just a little bit to get it to fit around the B4 wheel axle, but that's relatively straightforward. And in total, the front is maybe a little bit wider than the rear, but it's very, very close. So I'd say it's good enough for the purposes here. Maybe if you can find a four-wheel drive wheel that has even a deeper offset that pushes the hex mount out and then the whole wheel in further, then that would help, realign everything a little bit. But this is pretty good. So, and of course, these are mounted with just a standard wheel hex. I think this is just it's an SC10 wheel hex. I just don't quite recall if it's the front or rear one. I just picked, because one of them is wider than the other, so I just picked the one that gave me the appropriate offset so that when I mounted this wheel, everything was kind of flush. Another thing I did have to do, though, is to put, how do I put this? I think I had to put spacers behind the pin here that the wheel hex mounts onto to push the wheel hex out just a little bit, because otherwise with the B4 wheel axle, if I just push that wheel hex in all the way on the drive pin, when I tighten the nut down, there's still a gap between when the nut is fully tightened down on all the threading and then where the wheel starts. So I needed to put some spacers down to push this wheel out just a little bit to the outside so that when the wheel nut tightens down, it actually touches the wheel and locks it in place. Let's see. Okay, so that should be it for the roller. For the electronics, I tried to go as vintage as I could with the electronics, with the exception of the servo. I'll get to that in a minute. So this is a Reedy Krypton 12-turn single modified motor. It's a brand new motor. I always like the old Reedy motors. I think they're really nice, and I think the actual stickers and design and everything is very beautiful. So I wanted to use a Reedy motor there. The receiver is a Novak NER 3FM. So basically, until the plated receivers were released in the mid to late 1990s, like Novak Mercury, and I think Tekin had one as well. The Novak NER series was sort of among the higher end receivers, and since I'm using Novak 90s era electronics, I also have a Novak speed control. This is the 410 M1C. So I also have a 410 HPC that I could have put in here, but I already put that in my 410 Legend build. So I wanted to do something a little different here. The M1C is historically significant in that it was the speed control used to win the 1991 Worlds, I believe, in both the two-wheel and four-wheel buggy classes. Could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure it won at least one of those. So this was basically the highest-end speed control you could buy on the market from Novak until the 410 HPC came out, I think in 1993 or so. So that's quite nice. And this is actually less common than the HPC. The HPC, as it is pretty hard to find. So I figured that would be appropriate for this build. For the steering assembly, this got a little tricky. So I had mentioned before that the problem with having this chain tensioner here is that it gets in the way of where the steering servo would normally mount. So if you were going to put a servo anywhere, while also accounting for the fact that I'm using the inline battery mounting option rather than the lateral battery mounting option that would make more room for a steering servo, there's very little space to put a servo here. So what I eventually decided to do was to get a low profile servo. This is a Sanwa or Airtronics ERS 971 servo. It's not a vintage servo, it's a modern servo. And I basically mounted it standing up straight with the servo horn at an angle, and I put the ball stud facing down, and there's just enough spacing here for a standard 1-inch turnbuckle with the standard ball studs to actually reach between the steering rack and the servo horn. So when I go full throw in one direction and full throw in another direction, everything works just fine. And what actually defines lock to lock are the actual little notches here on the steering knuckle on the MIP Legend parts here. So I think it's the inside knuckle. This notch hits this caster block and prevents the wheel from going any further. And then as we go to this side, you can see that notch moves in and it hits this little notch here on the caster block and prevents it from going further on this side. So that's what defines your lock to lock. Okay, so that's pretty much it. I suppose if you're a member of RC10talk.com, or if you're on Facebook on the RC10 Vintage Mania forum, if you want to call it that, you've probably already seen pictures of this with the body and everything. But in any case, this is everything all set to go, all completely finished. I do have to work on the body and the wing for my 410 Legend. I did have one painted up, but the masking went a little wrong, so I have to redo it. So I will have that soon, but at least for the SP-2, this is all set and ready to go. So I hope you enjoyed this build series, and maybe you learned a thing or two from it. I certainly learned quite a lot. These are really fun builds to do, and I just want to say I'm very grateful for the person who donated these parts to me. It was very nice of him to do so, to do this SP-2 restoration, and it was just a lot of fun to do. So thanks for watching.